There's my contact information. So you can, if you need to be in touch with me, those are some ways. And also, I'll point out a couple of things. I was just going to work on it. I think my batteries have died here. My email address. This is my website, just my personal website with a lot of information about where I'm presenting and some history. This bottom one is a resource book website for the books that I've written, where I just dump downloadable pedagogic resources, and it's free for anyone to just log on and use as they will. Okay, so today I'm going to be comparing male and female acoustic register transitions, and the main points are there are both acoustic registers in my view, and laryngeal registers. Managing acoustic registers well helps us manage laryngeal registers better. There are both parallels and differences between male acoustic register issues and female or treble voice acoustic registers. The parallels probably historically have caused some of us to think that, well, it's the same, because there are some parallels between them. But therefore, that can lead to trouble because there are some key differences. So men teaching women and women teaching men need to know the differences as well in order to be able to teach effectively. And that's basically what that last bullet says. Understanding both parallels and differences improves our teaching across gender. So, laryngeal registers have long been acknowledged and debated, but currently, I'm going to move through some of this initial material rather quickly to get to the heart of the thing. Now, the sort of common scientific terms for these, although it's still being debated, is mode 0 for pulse or fry, mode 1 for what we used to call chest. Some of us still use those words. I don't worry about terminology too much. I'll use them interchangeably. Mode 2 for head, what we call head voice, or a thin, stretched fold rather than the shorter, thick fold. And then mode 3 for whistle. I'll mostly be referring to the modes 1 and 2 today, or historic chest and head in my talk. Both males and females have access to all of those registers, though not every male or every female accesses all of those registers. It is possible. And so therefore many teachers are, in a sense, cross-training in training men like women and women like men to really access the full range of the voice and work it out. However, by the way, my whole history, I teach at an undergraduate conservatory in Wisconsin, and the heart of my business has all been classical. I occasionally help some students with belt, but I'm no specialist in that or other styles. So what I'm saying is primarily geared to classical, though the landscape is the same for everyone. We just play in that garden differently. So just so you understand, some things will seem a little bit that directed. They are a lot directed that way. Anyway, non-treble males in Western classical, we have learned that we used to say, no, I'm in my head voice. We're pretty much basically in mode 1 for the full range, which means we have some depth of chord contact, some thickness of chord throughout our range for sort of operatic singing, unless we're doing a deliberately sort of soft float effect in which we might venture into mode 2. The treble voices use both. There was a time when some teachers wouldn't let the females get into mode 1. That was unfortunate, I think. We now understand that it's really very good for the voice to use the whole voice, the cross-training thing. So the natural transition between the laryngeal registers is pretty much in the same location regardless of gender. Somewhere between C4 and G4. Most people say somewhere around E flat 4. Just sort of untrained yodel transitions right in that area. So laryngeal registers are fairly stable in their location, though you can choose to move them around a bit, obviously, but they tend to be there. Acoustic registers, here's the case for acoustic registration. First of all, they're not, I think, vocal registers are not just laryngeal, and the reason is from the definition. Now, the registers historically have been defined as a segment of range of a similar timbre made by a similar mechanical principle. Those were the words used, mechanical principle. They probably were thinking laryngeal mechanical principle, okay? But since they didn't use the term laryngeal, at least in the definitions you mostly run into, I'm co-opting that and saying there are acoustic mechanical principles that cause shifts in timbral segments of your range, And when we hear those shifts, we used to think they were laryngeal. They're not all laryngeal. Some of them are purely acoustic, with no real change at the larynx. There might be a little bit of an influence of the acoustic on the larynx, but some of those timbral shifts are pure acoustic phenomena. So we have to deal with that. I mean, if you want to come up with another term other than register, that's fine. I'm calling them acoustic registers. They are range segments of a similar timbre made by a same mechanical acoustic principle that then shifts to another range segment with a different cause acoustically. So I talk about acoustic registers and laryngeal registers and how they interact with one another. Sometimes they're both acoustic and laryngeal at the same time. And, you know, well, everything's laryngeal if you're making a sound, but you know what I mean, in terms of the changes and so forth. So, acoustic registers are determined by the relationship between the first few harmonics from the voice source. And when I do gestures up here, I do this for harmonics. Got a lot of harmonics, right? My pointer is the fundamental frequency, the so-called pitch I'm singing, and the harmonics above it. And then I do formants with this hand over here. My wife wants to fix me some little finger puppets because she says people don't follow what you're doing with all this stuff here. So I will repeat that later. So we have we do harmonics created from the voice source, a set of harmonics, and I don't have enough fingers. There could be infinite number of harmonics above that fundamental frequency. And how they interact with the lowest resonance, which is a better term, really a more accurate term for the resonances of the vocal tract. In much literature and in my own writing, because I just use the language I've inherited, we refer to those as formants. The difference is purely this: resonances are the characteristics of the vocal tract, and formants are the characteristics of the sound out in the radiated spectrum. And they can be similar, they can be almost the same, and they can also be rather different, depending on what sounds you're running through your resonances. But well, I'll refer to them as formants today. I'm talking about resonances of the vocal tract. All right. However, first formant locations, first resonance locations of the vocal tract vary by as much as an octave from your lowest E formant. There's a wide range over an octave of where those resonances lie. That means that although laryngeal registers are fairly stable in their location, acoustic registers change by vowel. So I can be in 3 different registers on the same pitch acoustically, depending on what vowel I'm singing. So they morph around, and that's where they interact. And I frankly think that's why the discussion around registers has been so confusing over the history of this, because there are all these phenomena, and they don't hold still. They move around on you, sort of like, what's going on? But once you understand it, it's actually pretty simple. Acoustic pedagogy, which is the piece of pedagogy that I'm trying to disseminate and focus on, is just one piece. It's not the whole picture. There are many other important things, but the acoustic piece is really useful because we can do things with it more deliberately. Anyway, you have to know a few things. The first few intervals of the harmonic series, you probably already know those, right? And also, you need to know about where first formants or first resonances lie in a cardinal set of vowels. If you know the cardinal set of vowels, where those formants are, you can pretty much guess where the others are because they will be within that same area pretty much. So let's take a look at that. Here's a harmonic series. We have an octave between the first and second harmonic. We have an octave and a fifth between the first harmonic and the third. And we have 2 octaves between the first and the fourth. I want to show you something else about this that's rather important. I didn't want that one, but let's do this. Here we go. Oh, where did it go? There it is. So, here, no, that's not the one I wanted. That's the one. So, here is a MODA synthesizer engineered by Svante Granqvist here in Sweden. On the keyboard, you'll see some numbered lines. Those are the harmonics. Wherever I set the pitch, you'll see a set of harmonics above it. This keyboard is missing the top C. If the top C on a typical piano keyboard were there, you would see with this person, and the black dot is on what we call middle C or C4. So this person is singing the C an octave below C4, C3. if you're singing C3, you have 32 harmonics within the keyboard out of which to form your sound. I use the piano keyboard as a sort of a rough guide for the harmonics that we're mostly interested in, the ones that we can tune and do a lot with. There are harmonics above that. We can hear about a little over 2 octaves above the keyboard, but that's getting into fluorescent light buzz territory. And the core of the sound is within the piano keyboard, and that's the part that we mostly manipulate. So if you're singing, on the other hand, here, middle C, you have 16 harmonics to play with. The 16th is on that top C. If you're singing this C here, middle of treble voice rant, you only have 8 harmonics. Notice how the spread of harmonics seems more spread apart as I go like this. This is going to be a huge difference in how you treat non-treble voices and treble voices. If a soprano is singing high C, she is making her core tone out of 4 harmonics. This is hugely different. Basses, you have no excuse. You have harmonics out the wazoo. You can completely paint in your tube resonances so that we get everything. Treble voices singing high have to match things up to have a good sound. And I could play that, by the way, the unresonated sound is just a buzz, a pitched buzz, the harmonic set, and so forth. Okay. Here's an approximate set of first formant locations with the formants are on the treble clef in boxes using IPA symbols. Vowel formants of pretty much all adults sit in contact with the treble clef. A fairly low set, a sort of a typical bass would be about D to D. There are basses that may be C to C, that low, but mostly they're in contact with the treble clef. A high soprano might be G to G. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. And so even the difference between large males and small females, the difference in where the formants sit is not huge. Like average male formants and average female formants are maybe a minor third apart. Even though we're singing an octave apart, that makes a big difference in how you manage things.
Is that so with the cardinal vowels, though?
With the cardinal vowels, but the non-cardinal vowels will fit within there, because there's hardly any vowel that's lower than E. Maybe U is a little bit lower than E and U, and there's really not much higher than a bright ah. Now, assuming you've got a stable tube length. If I shorten my tube by raising my larynx seriously, I can move them all up, because the vowel formants are built by tube shape and tube length. The whole formant set is tube length. So the shorter the tube, the higher the formant set, and the longer the tube, the lower the formant set. And that's the primary determinant, actually, of vocal category, because where the formants sit determines the overall depth of the sound, or the brightness of the sound, the height of the sound. Within that, we can move some vowel formants around, but the overall set is set by your tube length. And if you want your sound to sound fairly consistent top to bottom, which is the goal in Western classical singing, you want a more or less stable tube length. All right? You don't want the tube length shifting around. Other genres definitely play with tube length as part of their palette, but we don't in Western classical. So I can do a, and you see that pattern there. That's the first resonance of the vocal tract on that set of vowels. So if acoustic registers have to do with the relationship between the harmonics, remember these fingers here, these are my harmonics, and the first resonance of the vocal tract, this hand over here, there are various things that could happen here. And if you remember these intervals, if I am singing a pitch an octave below those formant boxes, which is where those pitches are, they're about an octave below, which harmonic is interacting with my first resonance? Second, because it's an octave above. If I'm an octave and a fifth below those formants, my third harmonic is interacting with my first resonance. And if I'm 2 octaves below, my fourth harmonic is interacting. That's really all there is to it. If you know where these formants are, and you can remember an octave and a fifth, 2 octaves, you're good to go. I mean, there's a lot more in the skill in applying that, but that's the basic information, and it's really easy. You can memorize that. E and U sit at the bottom of the treble clef. A and O sit somewhere in the middle of the treble clef, depending on the voice type. In medium voices, it's around C. Ah sits near the top of the treble clef. Done, right? Seven things you can memorize that really quick. Okay. So acoustic registers are defined by the number of harmonics at or below the first resonance. There are arguably at least 4 acoustic registers. Open timbre, which Italians call voce aperta. Closed timbre, which Italians call voce chiusa. Pavarotti said in some interviews, he used the word cover in one interview. In another interview, he said the word close. He said, I want the young men to close in the passaggio. It's an Italian term, to close, and we'll talk about what that actually means. He's talking about voce chiusa, or closed timbre. Whoop timbre, which is a designation that I used. Donald Miller calls it hoot. I call it whoop. It's the same thing. I was trying to come up with a word because I'm very interested in innate responses of the human being to life, and sort of common language rather than terminology that's specialized. And at least in the States, particularly in the South where I grew up, if people go to sporting events, they have 2 options to make a lot of sound. They can yell or they can whoop. Woo, woo. I did some whooping at some of these concerts here this week where a fabulous performance happened. Woo, you know. Some people think that's a little crass, but you know, I was excited by the performance. So, and then whistle is arguably an acoustic register. I'll get into that a little bit more later. So let's do them in detail. Open timbre, voce aperta, occurs when there are at least 2 harmonics from the source. Remember, here's the source. Now I'm going to reduce this to 2. That's not 1 and 4. Now this is harmonic 1 and harmonic 2, okay? And here's my first resonance. If there are 2 harmonics at or below the first formant, I'm in open timbre. So how far below the first formant am I singing? At least an octave. So anytime you're singing an octave or more below the first formant, you're in open timbre. On the vowel that you're on, right? The first one is going to move by vowel. If it's an E vowel, it's way down here. If it's an A vowel, it's way up there. But so say I had 4 harmonics again. Well, this is still open timbre. This is all open timbre because I've got 2 or more, 2 or more, 2 or more, right at 2. Now I'm no longer in open timbre. And I'm less than an octave below my first formant. There's an octave between the first and second harmonics. So I have about an octave range there in that situation. I've skipped ahead, though this is open timbre. So the more harmonics there are below the first formant, the more open the timbre will sound. And I'll demonstrate that later. Each time a harmonic moves through the first formant, there is some degree of timbral closure. If you keep exactly the same throat shape and harmonic formant shape, and glissando up and down, the vowel and the timbre will close. Oh, ah. Instead of ah, I reshape. I keep the shape the same. The timbre will migrate. We call that passive vowel modification. Crossings lower than the second harmonic, right? So here's my second harmonic. Say my fourth harmonic crosses over. Every time one of these harmonics crosses over above the first formant, there's a little timbral closure. I will demonstrate that later if I can get to it. The predictability of all of these events indicates you kept the shape the same. If you can keep the shape the same, you can predict where every one of those is going to happen. And if that's a goal, which it is in Western classical, for a good percentage of what we do, of keeping a stable shape and tube length, it's useful pedagogically. So if it doesn't happen where it's supposed to happen, you can know they did some things. Yelling is a special form of open timbre. It's exactly that, where your second harmonic is very near the peak of your first resonance. And then when it gets there, we like that. Our bodies like to track rising harmonics with the first formant. It's built in, it's innate. Yelling we know how to do from birth, okay? So it gets there and we like that, so we track it. We raise that first resonance with that second harmonic to track that second harmonic. And we do first formant raising in nature by narrowing the pharynx. Did I say that in here? Yeah, narrowing the pharynx, raising the larynx, and widening the vowel, an increasingly divergent resonator shape. So we'll take an ah, and here's a standard opposition. or we'll take an A. We don't want that in Western classical, but some other styles exploit that and use that. All right, but they yelling in the raw, it can be very hard on the voice. So other styles learn really healthy ways to keep the breath pressure levels comfortable, the glottal closure force comfortable, so that you can use it aesthetically for artistic purposes. Some people are offended by my saying, comparing other styles to yelling, and I say, chill. Why would we do that? Because yelling is very emotional and very communicative. We yell in moments of high drama, and so we want to use that aesthetically for those other genres. That's why belting, high belting is, it's like, it's using a similar acoustic strategy aesthetically and healthily, if well done, right? Just like anything. So, the acoustic percept of open timbre is it's brighter, it's more speech-like, it's more exposed, it feels a little bit more like out your mouth and wide. It rings more on the hard palate, and it's potentially mouthy. When I go yell-like, it's kind of mouth dominant, a very divergent position. Closed timbre. Closed timbre of voce chiusa has only one harmonic below your first resonance. So if I was here was an open timbre, and now I'm in closed timbre, because there's only one harmonic below my first resonance. So how long does closed timbre last? Range-wise. It's about an octave, right? You got an octave between, it's just under an octave. You're in closed timbre, and you have most of an octave left. You're right. So its effect and acoustic percept is there's some timbral closure. This is why Pavarotti, the Italian, said close in the passaggio. It doesn't mean, I guarantee you, Italian does not mean I'm closing my throat. It's something in the acoustic sound we relate with that word closure. And these are all analogies. There's sensory analogies, but I can agree with that. There's a concentration of the acoustic sensation in close. It's as if the sound is being, I sometimes think of those kaleidoscope things where you turn them and just kind of, and an internalization as well. So instead of externalizing and opening, it's internalizing and gathering and collecting in sensation. This is acoustic, not necessarily physical, at least in terms of the shape of the vocal. I also feel that there's a kind of a migration, a sensory migration of your acoustic sensation. Whereas in open timbre, you see that epsilon drawn in this head figure here. Open timbre is kind of like the middle leg of that epsilon. It's ringing out the mouth on a hard palate. As you go up, which you're doing if you're going into closed timbre, the sensations tend to travel like this, vibratory feedback sensations. So it goes from E or ah, and depending on your student, they may need to think more about the under curve if they're raising their larynx and you don't want that, or they may need to think more about this piece, or eventually a bit of both. That can be a useful little path sensation. It feels more domed, internalized, less exposed, hence the word cover. The word cover a lot of people don't like because we don't want to imply muffled or swallowed, but it's, Pavarotti used the word and he did okay. So I don't argue over those terms. You just make sure the sounds are doing what you want them to do. Then use whatever term you prefer. I don't use it. Usually I use the term turning over, but then David Jones doesn't like turning over. Gira, again, I don't argue over the terms as long as we identify the experience and have some label. A perceived tallness in the back room. I have a little body mapping exercise that I call front room and back room. The back room actually is not in the back. It's in front of your ears because the pharyngeal column is always in front of your ears. The back wall is always in front of your ears. It's a false percept when it feels like it's behind your ears. That's a backed up tone. So why do I use the term close instead of closed? You'll see both terms used by in phonetics. IPA uses close. I like close because they're degrees of close. I don't think there are degrees of closed. It's closed or it's not. And you can pronounce something more closely or less closely, and that's useful pedagogically. So I just choose to use that word for that reason. No other reason than that. There's nothing wrong with the other term. Turning over or cover occurs when you move from open timbre, well, my two harmonics, to closed timbre. It occurs when your second harmonic rises above your first resonance. That's open, that's close. This is turning over or cover. And if you do that purely by raising the pitch and not by changing the shape, you will get a very easy, subtle, smooth turn of the voice rather than a ha-ee-ga, rather than a auga turn, which can give the term cover a bad name when it's that dramatic, though it can be used. Whoop timbre is having the pitch you're singing or the fundamental frequency match your first resonance. And then you track that. So at that point, you do track. In Western classical, I recommend don't track any harmonic other than the first harmonic. Just let them all move through the first formant until you get there and then track that one. And since E and U, if you remember, E and U are near the bottom of the treble clef, A and O are like it's C above that. Most male, non-treble male voices only can whoop E and U. We don't sing high enough, unless we're countertenors, to whoop the other vowels. But the treble voices can whoop any vowel. We tend to all start on U, and then, whoop, as we whoop I, we open up to the other vowels. But that's the difference. So I said that. Usually I start opening in order to track that within about a whole step above where you arrive on that first formant. So treble voices are very much benefited. I think treble voice singing an E vowel, and they're into the treble clef a little bit. I would say by G or A, you can already begin to subtly open. If I were to whoop an E vowel, E. If I don't open, especially with my health condition, E, I'm going to have some acoustic problems there. But if I track it, E, then it works. E and U need to be open fairly early, just into the treble clef a little bit. O and A, the top half of the treble clef, you're already opening those. Ah, you can keep close to pretty much near the top of the treble clef. You don't have to open it until you're above the treble clef. In this octave, this close position octave, you have options. You can open it, get a different timbre, or not, and you will see a variety of performers choosing different options. I tend to say don't open until you need to. Mouth opening in a young training singer tends to trigger the yell response. So if they're going, they'll tend to. But you can teach them how to open better, but that'll be their instinct. So I leave it close until I need to start opening to train a settled larynx for Western classical, and then I open. There are a couple other reasons to open if you want to get an F2 tuning for a male upper tone. Okay, non-treble voices. Non-treble voices that don't want to sound like head voice, if they want to kind of the so-called virile sound, the ringing sound, they will raise the first formant to avoid whoop timbre. So say I'm approaching an E vowel from below, I'm in close timbre on E, and I'm getting close, this would be whoop, and I'm getting close to there, and I don't want it to sound heady, I'll raise my first formant to keep it above the pitch I'm singing, so that my timbre will stay ringier. And I'm going to demonstrate, about whistle register, I'm going to skip ahead. It's basically singing above your first formant. I won't get through this if I answer questions now, so hold on to those. My apologies, but I think people really want me to get to some of this stuff. So let me quickly find what I want here. I'm going to go to E. Is that the E? That is the E. All right, here is an E. And that arrow is at the first resonance or the first formant of that E vowel. It's a little faint, but that's where I got it right there. Let's listen to this. I'm going to demonstrate some of those registers. So I have two harmonics below that first resonance. What register am I in acoustically? Open timbre, closed timbre. Two harmonics below the first formant. Open timbre. Two or more, you're in open. This is an open timbre E. Notice when that second harmonic rises above the first resonance, the tempo shift. that timbral shift, there's a closure. Below that E sounds a little bit more open. E. Men in the rooms, do that for me. So if you attend to it, you can begin to hear that. It should be subtle, so we mostly don't notice that, but it's there. Right? So E and U closed so low we don't even think about those as being acoustic registers, but they are. So now I'm going to show you. Now I'm not going to change the Formant setting or the resonance setting at all, which means this bass is keeping his vocal tract shape exactly the same, but I'm going to raise the pitch, and I want you to notice what happens to the timbre of the sort of, it'll sound like the laryngeal, and I'm also not changing the input shape of the set of harmonics, which means I'm keeping him in chest register, laryngeally, right? So I suspect voice teachers in the room would say, well, now he's in a kind of a headier sort of timbre. He's still in chest laryngeal register, but he's in whoop tuning acoustically. Acoustic registers can mimic laryngeal registers, which has confused the issue for us over time. We thought, oh, now he's in head voice, or some mix or something. Actually, he's still in chest voice laryngeally. Now, would a human being do that? Well, it could be that the whoop timbre isn't going to encourage the larynx to make some adjustments, but it's very interesting that happens. So that's whoop timbre. Let me show you what would happen if he sings above his first formant with this E without changing. So now he's not going to have anything to resonate, increasingly his fundamental, and it will thin. Right? I'm going to have this bass open his mouth. Ladies, that's why you have to open an E vowel in the treble clef and higher. And curiously enough, near the top of the treble clef, very few people actually do this, but it would be even better if they did. The reason they don't is not intuitive. Your E vowel needs to be more open than your A vowel at the top of the treble clef. So, and the Lord knows with that. I have wasted thyroid lip noise, so my voice doesn't work anymore. But when I used to sing Maria at the high thing at the end, Maria, if I do the way we speak it, I would do Maria, Maria. If I do it acoustically well, I would do Ma. I don't have to open my ah. I can't sing as high as my ah resonance. Maria, 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 Maria. Doesn't work. So train your women to, you cannot over open an E vowel. It's not possible. You can't get that resonance in too high. So you can look funny if you try to over open, but you can't get it. So you can risk really opening an E vowel up high to get a better full sound. The tongue is high. The tongue is staying high to make it an E. So I'm not doing Maria, 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 Maria. Tongue hump is very near the roof of the mouth. Okay, back to this. Singer examples. Let me see if I can pull up some singer examples. Oh, come on. So, here's George London. What am I doing on time? Oh, Lord, I'm at 11. This happens every time. You'll hear some levels. Close timbre. Open. 3 harmonics under. 4 harmonics. So what you'll notice is it gets buzzier sounding the more harmonics below. That's a more open timbre, a more close timbre. Let's just see how well I can imitate that. different levels of open timbre. And if you train yourself to listen for it, that means he left his tubing pretty much the same and let those things happen, rather than making a lot of shape changes, which he doesn't need to do. Very quickly pull up one tenor to recover. Quickly, this will be the last thing. Unfortunately, there was one. This is a soprano. Open the E vowel So basically the takeaway is below the turn and above the turn, non-treble male voices don't have to open. They have to open on E and U if they want to avoid whoop and if they want to be resonant high. Treble voices above the whoop timbre need to start opening. So it would be parallel going into turn and going into whoop. It's parallel between male and female voices. But above those phenomena, males can stay in closed timbre, females or treble voices have to open to be resonant. And if you just know that simple difference, it'll improve your teaching across gender considerably. There was more information. I have the website. There's lots of downloadable stuff on there. I have some books that explain this stuff if you get interested in it. So thank you very much for your attention.